Everyone thinks being needed means being valued, until the day you stop showing up. At first it feels simple. You answer, you help, you make time even when it costs you something. People smile, they thank you, they call you reliable. And slowly, without you noticing, that identity begins to lock in. Not as someone appreciated, but as someone expected. Days turn into weeks, weeks into years. The calls don't stop, but the gratitude does. No one asks if you're tired anymore. No one checks if you're okay. They just assume you'll be there, always. Like a routine that never breaks. And that's where the shift happens. Because the more available you become, the less visible you are. What once felt like connection starts to feel like obligation. What once felt like kindness starts to feel like a role you didn't choose but can't leave. Most people stay in that role for too long. Until one day something small changes. Not dramatic, not loud, just a quiet decision. To not answer, to not go, to not be there this time. And in that silence, something unexpected begins to unfold. Because absence reveals what presence never could. This is the story of a man named Adrian, and the moment he disappeared, just long enough to finally be seen. In a quiet hillside village, there was a man named Elias. Someone people rarely, and he wasn't the strongest man in the village. Others could lift more. He wa, and he sir, but when something broke, his name was the first to be me. A fence collapsed after a storm. Elias was already there, hammer in hand, a heavy sack. Somehow, without anyone ever deciding it, Elias became the solution to problem. At the beginning it felt meaningful. People would nod when they saw him. Some would clap his shoulder and say, "Good thing you were around." Others would smile with relief the moment he arrived. It gave him a quiet sense of purpose, a role that felt earned, not fork. And so he leaned into I. Day after day, he filled the gaps in other people's lives. Small tea morning would start with one knock on his door. And by nightfall, he would still be walking home, hands, aching, clothes, covered in dust. He didn't even remember getting. He never counted how much time he gave away. He never stopped to ask why it was always him. Because every thank you felt like enough. Or at least that's what he kept telling himself. That was the rhythm of his life. Before the sun had fully risen, there would already be a knock, soft at first, then more certain, as if the answer was guaranteed. By nightfall, when the village should have gone quiet, someone else would appear carrying a problem they couldn't or wouldn't handle alone. Even on the road, strangers learned quickly. If they saw Rowan passing by, they would stop him without hesitation. And Rowan rarely turned away. He didn't negotiate. He didn't delay. A simple request was enough. A look of need was enough. He would nod once and step into another task that had nothing to do with his own life. Because somewhere along the way, he had built a belief he never questioned. If people need you, it means you matter. So he kept saying yes. Not loudly, not proudly, just consistently, until it became automatic. But something subtle began to shift. People stopped asking. They didn't wait for his answer anymore. They didn't check if he was busy, or resting, or already exhausted from the last favor. When something broke, someone would casually say, "Rowan will handle it." When a burden appeared, the response was immediate, almost effortless. "Just find Rowan." As if his time didn't belong to him. As if his presence was no longer a choice, but a given. And Rowan followed that expectation without resistance. Until one winter morning, something felt different. One morning, without warning, his body refused to follow the routine he had built for years. Caleb woke up burning with fever, his limbs heavy, his breath uneven. Standing felt impossible. Even sitting up took more strength than he had. For the first time in a very long while, he couldn't open the door for anyone. At first the village reacted. Word traveled quickly. A few neighbors stopped by, their voices softer than usual. Someone left a basket of food by his door. Another lingered just long enough to ask how he was feeling before stepping away. It felt almost comforting. But that didn't last. Days passed. The footsteps outside grew quieter. The knock stopped completely. And beyond his window, life didn't pause. It adjusted. The broken cart near the hill remained where it was tilted and abandoned. The leaking roof across the road still dripped with every passing cloud. The stones that once needed lifting simply stayed in the dirt untouched. No one came back to ask. No one returned to check. Caleb lay there watching it all through a narrow slice of glass as morning turned into evening, and evening into another silent day. At first, he thought they were waiting. Then he realized they weren't. And slowly, something unfamiliar began to take shape, not outside, but inside him. A quiet realization he had never allowed himself to see. Then something shifted. Not in him, but out there. The baker, who had always waited for help, crouched beside his cart and wrestled with the broken wheel until it finally turned again. A farmer climbed onto his own roof, steadying himself against the wind, replacing splintered boards one by one. Two brothers, who used to stand around arguing, lifted the stones together, clumsy at first, then stronger with each attempt. And a quiet neighbor, the kind who avoided even the smallest repair, stood in his yard, trying, failing, trying again, until something finally worked. It wasn't smooth, it wasn't efficient, but it didn't stop. From his bed, Silas watched the village move without him. Not faster, not better, but forward. And for the first time, the feeling that rose in his chest wasn't pride. It was something closer to loss. Because for years, he had believed he was the reason things held together. That without him, everything would stall, maybe even fall apart. But that belief began to crack. They hadn't needed him to survive. They had needed him because he never gave them a reason to try without him. And now, as they stumbled through their own solutions, something unexpected became clear. His presence had been helping them, but his absence was changing them. Weeks later, when the fever finally loosened its grip, Lucien stepped outside for the first time. The village looked the same narrow paths, the same wooden fences, the same voices drifting through the air. But something beneath it had changed. People still greeted him, still nodded with that quiet respect he had always known. A few even smiled, relieved to see him standing again. Yet this time, there was a pause, a small hesitation that hadn't existed before. "Lucien, are you free today? Do you think you could help us with something?" The words were almost the same, but the meaning wasn't. For the first time in years, they were asking, not assuming, not assigning, not placing the weight on him before he could even speak. And Lucien noticed it immediately. At first, he said yes, out of habit more than choice. But then slowly, he stopped answering so quickly. Sometimes, he would look at the task, look at the person, and simply shake his head, not with guilt, not with fear, just with clarity. And something unexpected happened. The world didn't fall apart. No one turned against him. No one accused him. Instead, they nodded and found another way. And in those small but how he finally saw himself. One late afternoon, as the light softened over the village road, Lucien noticed an old traveler resting beneath a crooked tree. The man leaned on a worn wooden staff, watching people pass as if he had nowhere else to be and no need to rush anywhere at all. Lucien greeted him, then sat nearby. They spoke casually at first. Small things, the weather, the road ahead. The kind of conversation that fills silence without demanding anything deeper. But after a while, the old man turned his gaze toward him, steady, almost knowing. "You carry a different weight today," he said quietly. "Lighter, but unfamiliar." Lucien let out a faint breath, the kind that doesn't fully turn into a laugh. "I was gone for a while," he replied. "Sick. Couldn't do much of anything." The old man nodded as if that confirmed something he already understood. And everything kept moving, didn't it? Lucien looked down the road for a moment, then gave a small, honest nod. "Yes," he said, "it did. Cancel, send." The old traveler bent down slowly and picked up a small stone from the edge of the road. Without a word, he placed it right in the middle of the path. "Walk past it," he said. Lucien glanced at the stone, then stepped slightly to the side and continued forward without effort. "That's nothing," he replied. The old man gave a faint nod, as if that answer was expected. Now imagine, it never moves, he continued. Day after day, it stays right there. Lucien looked back at the stone, thinking for a moment. People would adjust, he said. They'd find their way around it. Exactly. The old man then reached out with his staff and nudged the stone aside, clearing the path completely. But what if, he said quietly, every time someone came close, the obstacle disappeared before they had to face it? Lucien didn't answer this time. He didn't need to. They would never learn, the old man finished. Not because they couldn't, but because they never had to. The space between them fell silent. And in that silence, the meaning settled, not as a lesson told, but as something finally understood. Lucien stayed there long after the old man had gone. The road was quiet again. The stone remained exactly where it had been placed. Small, ordinary, easy to ignore. And for the first time, Lucien didn't reach for it. He simply watched. One person approached, slowed slightly, then stepped around it without thinking. Another followed, adjusting their path with barely a glance. No frustration, no hesitation. Just quiet adaptation. It was subtle, but it was enough. Because in that still moment, something inside him finally aligned. He began to see what he had never questioned before. There are people who move through life the way he once did, always available, always stepping in before things fall apart, always smoothing the path before anyone else feels the weight of it. It looks like kindness. It feels like purpose. But over time, it shapes something else. When every obstacle is removed too quickly, no one learns how to face it. When every burden is carried for them, they forget they were strong enough to carry it themselves. And then one day, when that constant presence disappears, not dramatically, not permanently, just long enough, something shifts. Not because people are forced to suffer, but because they are finally given space to respond, to try, to struggle, to figure it out in their own way. And in that space, something quiet begins to grow. Not dependence, but strength they didn't realize had been there all along. And then, another shift revealed itself. Not in what people did, but in how they began to see. When Lucien was no longer everywhere at once, something unfamiliar entered the space he used to fill. Not frustration, not resentment. Awareness. People paused longer before asking. They noticed the effort behind things that once felt effortless. They remembered what it was like when someone always stepped in before the problem even fully appeared. Because what is always there quietly disappears. Not physically, but in value. Lucien's presence had never been small. It had just been constant. And constancy has a strange effect. It turns gifts into expectations, effort into routine, care into something invisible, but distance, even a little of it, changes the shape of everything. It doesn't break connection, it redraws it. Because when something is no longer guaranteed, people begin to see it for what it truly is, not a function, not a role, but a choice. And that realization does something no amount of giving ever could. It brings honesty back into the space between people. It reminds them that help is not owed, that presence is not automatic. And sometimes, the most powerful lesson you leave behind is not in what you do for others, but in what they finally learn to do once you stop doing it for them. If this story lingers in your mind, don't rush past it. Pause for a moment today, just a quiet one, and ask yourself something most people never think to question. Where in your life are you always stepping in before things get difficult? Where are you clearing the path before anyone else even has to notice the obstacle? And what would happen just once if you didn't? Not out of coldness, not out of neglect, but out of awareness. Because sometimes the road feels easy, not because it is, but because you've been carrying the weight for everyone else. And the moment you step back even slightly, something important begins to unfold. Not collapse. Growth. Someone hesitates, then tries, then figures it out in a way they never had to before. And in that space, you create, not by doing more, but by doing less. People begin to move forward on their own. So if this message found you at the right time, don't keep it to yourself. Pass it on to someone who might need to see it from a different angle. And if you want more stories that don't just entertain, but quietly shift the way you see things, stay with us. Because sometimes clarity doesn't come from adding more to life, but from finally removing what was never yours to carry.